Yesterday's Dhamma talk was on Kayanupassana, Satipaṭṭhāna, namely the mindful contemplation of the body, and today we shall go on exploring what is meant by Vedananupassana, Satipaṭṭhāna, namely mindful contemplation of feelings. And those feelings are, or contemplation of the feelings is an integral part of the instructions on Satipaṭṭhāna in general. Now, in the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, volume 159, we find the following instructions regarding feelings. First, as three kinds of feelings, and then as 6 kinds of feelings. And the translation is by Venerable Analayo, and his translation is based on Venerable Ñāṇamūli's translation of the relevant passage. And I'm quoting, "When feeling a pleasant feeling, a meditator knows I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling an unpleasant feeling, a meditator knows I feel an unpleasant feeling. And when feeling a neutral feeling, a meditator knows I feel a neutral feeling." This is one part. Now, the next part is as follows, namely, when feeling a worldly pleasant feeling, one knows I feel a worldly pleasant feeling. When feeling an unworldly pleasant feeling, one knows I feel an unworldly pleasant feeling. When feeling a worldly unpleasant feeling, one knows I feel a worldly unpleasant feeling. When feeling an unworldly unpleasant feeling, one knows I feel an unworldly unpleasant feeling. And when feeling a worldly neutral feeling, one knows I know a worldly neutral feeling. And the last one is when feeling an unworldly neutral feeling, one knows I feel an unworldly neutral feeling. Now, what we have here is a division into two different arrangements regarding feelings. Feelings arranged as 3, namely as pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and then those same 3 feelings are further being distinguished between worldly and unworldly feelings. So worldly, unworldly, pleasant, and then worldly, unworldly, unpleasant, and then worldly and unworldly neutral. Now, the difference between the two is that the Buddha, upon gaining enlightenment, noticed for himself that, obviously, disregarding feelings, in particular pleasant feelings, did not work, like many ascetics at his time used to do. And based on the belief that they needed to work off all their bad karmic deeds from the past, and this was best done by subjugating this body to all sorts of penances or austere practices. And thus the arising of a pleasant feeling was considered as not opportune, or as not desired. And so the Buddha then reflected and realized that when he was younger, he had practiced the jhanas, and indeed some pleasant feeling arose, but that pleasant feeling was in connection with the jhana practice. And it was not a pleasant feeling in connection with indulging in some sense pleasure. And he realized that unpleasant, unworldly feeling connected with the jhana practice was wholesome, had a positive ethical quality to it. And hence, he made this further distinction between worldly pleasant and unworldly pleasant. Instead of unworldly, we can also say spiritually pleasant. Now, the Pali term for worldly is samisa, and the Pali term for unworldly is niramisa. Now, the first term, samisa, is actually compounded of two, namely sa and amisa. Amisa is connected with the flesh, and sa means with, so connected with the flesh. Any kind of feeling that is connected with the flesh. So this then has led some translators to translate this term as carnal feeling. So carnal pleasant feeling and carnal unpleasant feeling, but this is maybe a little bit too much. And so worldly pleasant and unpleasant is quite enough. And what is meant here by this worldly feeling is a feeling that is connected with the five sense pleasures and indulging in them. Whereas in the second case of the unworldly or spiritual, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling, this is rather related to renunciation. So spiritual practice, renouncing temporarily or on a permanent basis, renouncing one's usual pleasures, and then undertaking maybe some meditation practice. Now,
I'm sorry, I'm missing, is the word worthy or the word worldly?
Worldly. Worldly and unworldly. So, with this, we have then, to say it again, first the division into three kinds of feelings, as pleasant feeling, which in the Pali language is known as sukha, vedana. Vedana stands for feeling, and sukha for pleasant. Then the unpleasant feeling, which in the Pali scriptural language is known as dukkha vedana, and then we have the neutral feeling, which in the Pali language is known as adukkha masukha vedana. And then each one of those three can be further subdivided, as we've seen, into worldly and unworldly, and hence we then end up with 6 kinds of feelings. Now, those unworldly feelings have to do with, or feelings that arise in connection with the spiritual practice, so meditation practice. And there are, as we shall see later on, certain points in one's meditation practice when, irrespective of sense, external worldly sense pleasures, some joy or happiness arises in the stream of consciousness. And so this then is accompanied by an unworldly feeling. And so, unworldly, pleasant feeling, And when a meditator is undertaking his or her meditation and certainly is striving very hard, however, thinks that he or she is not making enough headway as expected or desired, then this may lead to an unworldly, unpleasant feeling. So a certain unpleasant quality is to this experience, but it has nothing to do with the indulgence in the sense, in the five sense pleasures. And then an unworldly, neutral feeling may arise at again a certain point in the meditation practice that is accompanied by wisdom and also equanimity, and this too is independent of the one's indulgence in the five sense pleasures. Now, maybe to explain the term five sense pleasures, since this hasn't been explained yet. The five senses, namely the seeing process, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Now, when we see some pleasant sight, like the beautiful scenery around here, maybe especially at in the morning at sunrise, and then we might indulge in this visual feast, natural visual feast, and we want to see more and more of it. We want to experience more and more of it. This would qualify under or as a sense pleasure related to the eye door. Then it may happen that we hear the breeze, the wind, and there's a rather, or maybe even better, we hear the sound of the water and the creek going by, flowing by, and this has a rather calming effect on the mind. So there's a pleasant feeling that goes along with this. Now, since this is a pleasant experience, a meditator may want to hear more and more of it. And this too then qualifies as a sense pleasure with regard, or indulging in a sense pleasure with regard to the ear door. And then after last night's rain, and in particular this morning, there's a very particular odor or scent around here, which has to do with the nature and the rain, and so this one might consider as rather fascinating, as pleasant, and one then indulges in it, and one can't get enough smelling it over and over again. And so this then would qualify as indulging in the sense pleasure related to the nose door. And then the obvious example regarding indulgence to the tongue door is what? Yes, please. Eating what?
Delicious food.
Oh, delicious food. Best food. But starting tomorrow, John's food. And John's food will also be pretty good. You will see. And so, then this may lead a meditator to enjoy the food, and then since it's so good, wanting to have more and more of it. And this then would qualify as indulgence in a sense pleasure related to the tongue door. And then regarding the fifth sense, namely the body door, well, you sit in meditation, and then you come across some really soothing chills and thrills going through the body, and you've never experienced anything like this, and so you like it very much, and so you indulge in it. And you want the experience to go on and on and on. So this then would be indulgence in sense pleasure regarding the body door. But maybe a more worldly example would be, well, let's say it's been cold all day long, and then finally you decide to take a shower with hot water, and so the hot water then does the trick and leads to a rather pleasant feeling, and you indulge in it, and you can't then get enough showering. Now, the definition of the classical fourfold definition of Vedana, of a feeling, the mental state of feeling, is as follows. Namely, it has the characteristic of being felt. And what this points to is that it covers the affective quality of an experience. So we experience some hard, let's say some smoothness, and in the body, and then the affective quality to that smoothness would be pleasant, the pleasant feeling. So please notice that pleasant feeling and the smoothness itself are two different things. The smoothness is a physical object, a bodily object, which has by itself no affective quality to it, or which is not the same as the feeling, namely in this case the pleasant feeling. And sometimes the affective quality of an experience is also being referred to lately as what? Who knows? Nicola?
Can you say the question again?
Another word for the affective quality of an experience. Another expression for the affective quality of an experience. Well, the feeling tone. So the feeling tone of an experience, and the function of feeling is as experiencing or as enjoying the desirable aspect of the object. And the manifestation is given as relishing of the associated mental factors. So relishing of the experience, relishing the experience through or done by the associated mental factors. And then the proximate cause is given as certain tranquility. And the illustration that we find in the Abhidhamma for this Vedana is that of a cook and a king. A cook prepares a meal and only has the chance to sample a little bit of this dish, a little bit of that dish, and so on. Whereas it is the king or the queen who you will have the opportunity to fully relish the entire meal in all of its aspects. Now, when it comes to the contemplation of feelings, then it's important to remember that they keep changing. Just like with the weather these days. A few minutes ago it was still somewhat dry, a little bit overcast though. Now it's raining. And maybe 1 or 2 hours later it will be over. And tomorrow morning it will be cold. And and then around lunchtime maybe it will be again a little bit warmer. So as the weather keeps changing all the time, we just have to put up with it and just accept it the way it is and make the necessary adjustments in terms of using an umbrella or maybe when it's warm taking some clothes off, and when it gets cold or when it's cold then to put some extra clothes on. So when it comes to these feelings, we just have to accept whatever comes along. Be it a pleasant feeling associated to a certain experience, be it an unpleasant experience, an unpleasant feeling associated with some different experience, or a neutral feeling associated again with some other experience. So we can choose. And so the best attitude with regard to feelings is simply just to accept, patiently accept whatever feeling comes up, and then to be mindful of it. Now, from an Abhidhamma point of view, feeling is a fundamental mental state. And this is reflected by the fact that it is included among one of the seven universals, seven universal mental factors, and those are number 1, contact, phassa, then number 2, feeling, then number 3, perception, number 4 is then volition, number 5 is one-pointedness of the mind, ekaggata, and then number 6 is the life faculty, and number 7 is wise attention, manasikara. Now, these 7 mental factors are known as universals, sabbasadharana citta, or cittasika in the Pali scripture language, because they arise in any kind of consciousness, and with regard in conjunction with any kind of mental factor. Be those accompanying mental factors wholesome or unwholesome or neutral, it doesn't matter, feeling will be there. So this then means there will be no moment of consciousness, and which is then accompanied by a number of different mental factors, which does not contain some form of a feeling, either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And the Digha Nikaya in volume 2, section 68 points out, when a pleasant feeling is felt, no painful or neutral feeling is felt, but only the pleasant feeling. When a painful feeling is felt, no pleasant or neutral feeling is felt, but only painful feeling. And when a neutral feeling is felt, no pleasant or painful feeling is felt, but only neutral feeling, which means only one feeling at a time, and not a mixture of those. Now, when we take feelings and we kind of focus on them in our contemplation, and we do this for a longer period of time, or at least once in a while, then sooner or later we will come to which intuitive understanding?
Impermanence.
Indeed. That a feeling is rather impermanent, rather transitory in nature. So, just like the weather conditions. And so, a feeling will not last forever, and since a feeling is so impermanent in nature, is it really worthwhile getting attached to it? So, when a pleasant feeling has arisen in the stream of consciousness based on some object, then should we get fully attached to it and grasp it and not let go of it? Obviously not. And so seeing the transitory nature of feelings, an arahant will no longer get attached to them at all, or be rather detached. And so whether an arahant is experiencing a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling, it doesn't matter. The arahant will be quite balanced, quite equanimous, quite detached about the whole thing. But let's contrast this with an ordinary human being, so a non-arahant. And so for an ordinary human being comes some wonderful experience, like maybe getting to eat an ice cream, and then there's some pleasant feeling attached to it, and then we can't get enough of it. And we want the ice cream to last forever. Naturally, it's not going to do us this favor. And so then when it comes to an unpleasant feeling or unpleasant experience that comes in association with an unpleasant feeling, then usually we want to get rid of it. And then with regard to neutral feelings, oftentimes ignorance arises. Now, with regard to pleasant feelings, there's still one more aspect. So, when there's some positive experience, either we want more and more and more of the same, because it is accompanied by a pleasant feeling, or if after a while we get tired of it, bored with it, then we crave for something else. So that's a rather human or rather common human pattern, and it's worth seeing it and letting go of it. Now, when talking about the contemplation of feelings in general, then we find that feelings are not just impermanent by nature, but they also share other common characteristics, such as
unsatisfying.
Yes, indeed, they're unsatisfactory, and what else?
They don't belong to a self.
Ah, there you go. They lack a self. And so there's no self there, which means that a feeling, Vedana, just like all all of the other conditioned formations is subject to the three universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And this one has to see in one's own meditation practice, not just hear it and know it theoretically. Now, when we carry out our meditation practice over a longer period of time, we may find that we may make the following rather interesting discovery. At the very outset of the retreat, there is a chronic pain, and let's say in the knee. And this chronic pain, under normal circumstances, is accompanied with an unpleasant feeling, or has an unpleasant feeling tone to it. Now, as we keep being mindful of it, and also of other objects, the situation may change, and then, as our practice deepens, we may find that same chronic knee pain now is associated with a neutral feeling. So, upekkha vedana. And then, again, sometime later, we may find, in the absence of other predominant pain centers in the body, that same chronic pain in the knee is now accompanied by a pleasant feeling. And the reason for this is, in the absence of predominant pains and aches, the mind has nothing really, no distinct object to focus on and to get concentrated with, and thus a pain, when it's there, is then welcomed by the meditator, and happily does the meditator observe it. So at that point, the chronic sensation that previously was seen as a pain now is related to or seen as a pleasant pain. So it's more or less the same object, the knee pain. However, over time, at first it's being, or it comes along with an unpleasant feeling, then a neutral feeling, and later on even a pleasant feeling. What this shows is the relativity of feelings with regard to one and the same object. So this too is something that we need to explore in our own meditation practice. Now, it is said correctly that it is relatively easy to see or to experience or to know the pleasant feelings as well as unpleasant feelings, but it is rather difficult to know the neutral feelings. So feelings that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So feelings that are in between. And the commentary recommends that a meditator pay attention to a state that lies in between. So when one experiences first maybe a pleasant feeling, then the pleasant feeling disappears, and then after a while one discovers an unpleasant feeling, and in between there is a period where the feeling is not that clear, and where the feeling is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, and this then would qualify as a neutral feeling. So it is in this way that one at first can approach the neutral feelings and get an idea of what a neutral feeling is, and then later on one becomes more confident in spotting those neutral feelings. Now, what do you think? The contemplation of feelings will lead us to the gaining of insight or not? Yes, no? Yes, it will indeed. And will it lead us to realization or not? Like the attainment of the first path, second path, third path, fourth path. Well, the texts say, yes, indeed, the contemplation of feelings may, just like the contemplation of the body, and like the contemplation of the mind and dhammas, lead to realization. Now, there is a particular reason why, among all mental factors, the Buddha has chosen Vedana or feeling as a separate establishment of mindfulness. And the reason for this lies in the fact that there is a causal link or causal connection between feeling and craving. So, a pleasant feeling will surely give, and if one is not mindful, will lead to the arising of craving tanha. So wanting more and more of the same experience. And when there is an experience that is accompanied by an unpleasant feeling, then this too may lead to, or will lead to craving, the arising of craving, in the case of an absent-minded meditator. And do you know why? An unpleasant experience. Does one crave for the unpleasant experience?
I would think that one craves for it to go away.
Ah, that's the correct answer, indeed. So, it's not craving for more of the unpleasant experience, but just like Stephen points out correctly, it's craving for the unpleasant experience to go away and to be replaced by some pleasant experience. And then if I'm not mistaken, when a neutral feeling arises, there's a certain amount of peacefulness there, and one might crave then for more of this. So in all three cases, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling, in the case of an absent-minded person, it will lead to craving. Now, there's another connection here, namely that the feelings, the three feelings, when each one of them arises, may trigger in an absent-minded person the activation of one of the roots of unwholesomeness. There are altogether three roots of unwholesomeness, namely greed, hatred, and delusion. So, the way this works is when some pleasant experience is there, which goes along with a pleasant feeling, then this will trigger and activate the mental defilement of greed. So it leads to the arising of greed. And in the case of some unpleasant, undesirable experience which is associated with an unpleasant feeling, this for an absent-minded person may trigger and activate the arising of hatred or ill will, dosa. And in the case of a somewhat neutral experience that is associated with a neutral feeling, this will trigger and activate ignorance to arise in the stream of consciousness. And since there is this strong link between a pleasant feeling and greed, an unpleasant feeling and hatred, and a neutral feeling and ignorance, the Buddha very much wanted his disciples to see this causal link and how it may lead to the arising of unwholesome mental states in order to cut all of this. And therefore he's made the feeling into a separate establishment of mindfulness, a separate contemplation. Now, to substantiate this point somewhat further, in the Digha Nikaya, section 258, volume 2, section 58, we find the following statement: feeling conditions craving. If there were absolutely no feeling born of eye contact. So by eye contact is meant the physical, with the physical eye seeing some object, in the mental state of contact arises. So, feeling born of eye contact, feeling born of ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, mind contact, in the absence of all feeling, with the cessation of feeling, could craving appear? And the answer to this is no, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Ananda, the Buddha is speaking to his attendant, just this is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition for craving, namely feeling. So, feeling leads under normal circumstances to craving. And as we've also seen, it may activate the other two roots. Now, as we've seen, feeling is of three kinds: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And furthermore, we can distinguish between bodily feeling and mental feeling. And so when it comes to bodily feeling, then the term sukha vedana is used, and when it comes to mental feeling, so a feeling in connection with a mental event or mental state, and then this is known in Pali as somanassa. So the definition for sukha vedana, namely the bodily pleasant feeling, is as follows. Namely, it has the characteristic of experiencing a desirable, tangible, or bodily datum. And its function is to intensify the associated states, and it is manifested as bodily enjoyment. And the proximate cause for it lies in the body faculty itself, which means this refers to the body sensitivity, or just to the body itself in which an experience occurs. Now, in the case of somanasa vedana, namely the feeling of gladness, it's characterized as experiencing a desirable object. And here, please notice, there's no more mention of tangible. So it covers both tangible as well as mental objects. Or a tangible object that then later gets processed as a mental object. Its function is to relish that desirable object in one way or another, and it is manifested as mental enjoyment. Now, sometimes meditators or non-meditators, when they hear the Buddha's teachings, and there's so much talk on dukkha, everything is dukkha, and in the Burmese language, for instance, the term dukkha has been made part of the language. So if something is an unpleasant experience or an unwanted experience, then people will just say, oh, dukkha. Era dukkha there. It's really something unpleasant. And so this then might certainly create a wrong impression. And so to rectify this, let me state that the Buddha has mentioned a number of occasions under which pleasant or happy states of mind, joyous states of mind arise. Now, one form of happiness that is available to human beings, and in particular to meditators, is what is known in the Pali language as anavajja sukham. Sukha is happiness, and anavajja is purity. And this happiness arises in which connection? And you are all practicing it. Meditation, more precise than this. The ethical conduct, yes, indeed. And so observing an ethical code of conduct leads to a pure bodily and verbal conduct, and this in itself then becomes a source for or source of happiness. So happiness of purity, the purity that comes from observing the precepts. And then to meditators is available yet another form of happiness, which in the Pali scripture language is known as abhyaseka sukha. And so this happiness is based on what? And again, you're practicing it.
Clear comprehension.
Concentration, that comes later. Yes? Any other?
Equanimity.
Wow, you're shooting very high. Well, very simple. Restraint of the senses. So, when we practice, and all of you are doing this, when we practice the restraint of the senses, so intentionally we don't look around, and so even though we may be hearing some interesting sound or so, we don't listen to it, then after a while we realize, it's not that bad. And so the mind not being bombarded by the senses, this in itself then leads to the arising of some happiness. And then, when a meditator at samatha, a meditator does or practices the jhanas, and then again different forms of joy and happiness are available. Namely, the joy and happiness of the first jhana, and then there is the joy and happiness of the second jhana, using the four-fold system of reckoning. And then later on, in the third jhana, the joy falls away. So piti falls away, the happiness, however, remains. And then, when we meditate, when we undertake vipassana meditation practice, and our practice then develops into the tender phase of the fourth insight knowledge, again a different kind of happiness tends to arise. Namely, happiness as an imperfection of insight. And so this happiness is frequently accompanied by joy, and also accompanied by tranquility of mind. And these three together are known in the Pali language as Dhamma Rati. Rati means the light, and Dhamma is simply the Dhamma, so Dhamma, the light. And these are three mental states of joy, tranquility, and happiness by far excel the happiness of ordinary worldlings, or ordinary worldly pleasures. Now, as human beings, we, especially as non-meditators, we think that all that is available to us are, the pleasures that come from indulging in the sense pleasures. So, enjoying an ice cream or some delicious food, or listening to some good music, watching a movie, this or that. And then, when one meditates, one realizes there is a different kind of delight available that is not dependent on going to the movies, that is not dependent on some delicious food, nor on some listening to some wonderful music, and so on. And this certain Dhamma delight then is said to be free from dangers, whereas ordinary worldly delight oftentimes is said to be accompanied by certain dangers. So drinking a glass of wine is great, but drinking 10 glasses of wine, one after the other, may not be that great anymore. And so it leads to a change of experience. The only disadvantage of Dhamma delight is that if one gets attached to it, if one craves for it, then one's practice might stagnate. When the Dhammapada verse with regard to this Dhamma delight is as follows, namely verse 373, and there it says, the bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, male or female meditator, who goes into seclusion to meditate, whose mind is tranquil, who clearly perceives the Dhamma, experiences a joy which transcends that of ordinary men and women. Now, the greatest form of joy and happiness is that which arises in connection with the realization of the Dhamma, namely which entails the experience of Nibbana. And Nibbana itself is referred to as Shanti, Sukha, the happiness of peace. And this is a type of happiness that is fundamentally different from the other forms of happiness that we have discussed so far. The ordinary types of happiness are all sensate types of happiness. They are based on the senses, some experience that involves our six senses. The peace of or the happiness of peace that comes with the experience of Nibbana is a non-sensate happiness. It does not rely on the six senses. Now, the Buddha has certainly clearly stated in a few past, and this is being recorded in a few places, that the realization of the Dhamma itself brings about joy and happiness. And the reason for this lies in what? What leads to happiness?
Permanence?
I mean, impermanence. Or the I didn't quite understand.
Permanence.
Permanence of what?
Spirit?
Of the spirit. No, not really. Any other suggestion? Ah, very good. Indeed, the end, the uprooting, the total uprooting of greed, hatred, delusion, and all other unwholesome mental states or mental defilements. And you see, as long as unwholesome mental states are present in the stream of consciousness, we're bound to suffer in one way or another. And there's a multiplicity of combinations possible. However, once the mental defilements have been partly or ideally even all been uprooted from the mind, then purity is there, and this purity itself is then a foundation for, or leads to, the arising of happiness. So please keep in mind that the Buddha's path of purification is a path that clearly leads to joy and happiness, and it is not a path that leads to dukkha. There may be occasions, spells of dukkha along the way, and actually quite a number, but the end result is definitely sukha and not dukkha. And in connection, just to maybe as a last point here, in the connection with joy and happiness, in connection with the fourth insight knowledge and seeing formations as arising and passing away, which marks one particular point in the meditation practice, the Buddha has said, every time one clearly comprehends the arising and perishing, or the disappearing of the formations of the five aggregates, one finds joy and gladness. That, to the wise, is the way to Nibbana. It's not Nibbana itself, but it's the way towards that. Now, maybe this much regarding the aspects connected with pleasant feelings, sukha vedana. Now, let's briefly explore dukkha vedana and the respective mental aspect, namely, or mental feeling, domanassa vedana. So, the painful feeling that's is associated with bodily formations is known as dukkha vedana, and its characteristic is that of experiencing an undesirable tangible object. Its function is that of withering the associated mental states. So it's weakening those, and the manifestation is as bodily affliction and not as bodily enjoyment, as in the case of sukha vedana. And the proximate cause here is certainly given as the body sensitivity. So basically just the body as a whole, the body which experiences an object. And then, as for domanassa vedana, namely displeasure, or literally it's translated as sadness of the mind. So the characteristic of this domanassa is experiencing an undesirable object. The function is of partaking of the undesirable object or aspects of the object, and the manifestation is as mental affliction, and the proximate cause is the heart base. And as pointed out at the outset of our talk, when unpleasant feelings arise, then we should not run away from them, but rather we should observe them patiently, or accept them, and then patiently observe them with a detached attitude of mind. And when we do so, then this will make a big difference. And when a person who is not mindful and who experiences some bodily pain which is associated with an unpleasant feeling, then in most cases this person will also experience some unpleasant mental state, or some difficult mental state, which will be accompanied by some unpleasant mental feeling. So displeasure will be there. However, in the case of a skillful meditator, the case will be different. And a meditator will be experiencing the same pain, and there'll be the same unpleasant feeling connected, bodily feeling connected with it. However, there won't be the mental displeasure. The Buddha has certainly said, as is recorded in Samyutta Nikaya Sutta, or the 22nd collection, in the first sutta, you should train yourself thus: even though I am afflicted in body, my mind will be unafflicted. And so as we become more and more experienced in the meditation practice, and more equanimity arises in the stream of consciousness, and then indeed we manage to keep the mind rather balanced, and then a neutral feeling will be there towards the bodily experiences, or towards the things happening in the body. So when it comes to, especially to the contemplation of painful or unpleasant feelings and displeasure, we should need to learn to disidentify from the feeling, and to just observe it as calmly and with as much equanimity as possible. Now, the last feeling is certainly the neutral feeling, and certainly this in the Pali scriptural language is known as adukkhama sukha vedana, and its characteristic is that of being felt as neutral, and its function is of neither intensifying nor withering the associated states, and its manifestation is as peacefulness. And there may be a neutral feeling regarding, a bodily sensation, but also regarding some mental event. Now, the amazing thing regarding neutral feelings is that two different conditions arise. A neutral feeling may arise in connection with ignorance, so there is no wisdom present. And so one observes an object, and one just recognizes or registers that it is accompanied by a neutral feeling. And one doesn't fully know the arising and the dissolution of that neutral feeling. Nor does one know the advantage, the disadvantage, and the escape from the neutral feeling. However, if we continue with our meditation practice, and then wisdom arises in the form of insight, knowledge, and in particular equanimity is present, then objects or formations that we've been observing all along many times start appearing in connection with a neutral feeling. And this happens in particular during the fourth insight knowledge, as well as during the 11th insight knowledge. And so at this point, a meditator usually is fully aware of that neutral feeling. And furthermore, when a meditator realizes the aspect of anatta with regard to the rise and fall or some other object, it doesn't matter, then oftentimes a meditator will say it's accompanied by a neutral feeling. So these are two cases for the arising of a neutral feeling in our meditation practice, and for you to keep an eye on and to be aware of. Now, this then brings us to the end of our Dhamma talk on Vedana Nupassana Satipaṭṭhāna. Let me conclude today's Dhamma talk by wishing, may you, or based on what has been said, may you apply this knowledge to your meditation practice, and may you become more and more skilled at working with or contemplating feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. May it help you to see the causal connection between feelings and craving, and may it also help you to see that feelings are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and lacking a self, and may it also help you to assume a rather detached attitude, and ultimately may it lead you to the realization of the Dhamma. And this is it for tonight. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, please.
When you were giving meditation instruction, you were talking about noticing the beginning, the middle, and nothing. Are you talking about...
Wait, you said nothing?
No, noting the beginning, middle, and end of objects.
Oh,
Are you saying to use that as a mental note? Or just to sort of know this is the beginning, middle, and end?
Right, it's the second. So just to know this is when giving the instruction like this, when talking about the beginning, middle, and end, this should be understood only on a conceptual level. It's just for ease of communication. There's no deeper meaning to this division into the beginning, middle, and end. And there will definitely, let's say, when you observe the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, there will be no signpost saying there, oh, here comes the end of the beginning, and there comes the beginning of the end. No. So that's just for the sake of communication.
So you said just to sort of know it, but not having to note this is beginning.
No. Yeah, there's no need to note that.
Because I was noticing noting it is a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. No, that makes it unnecessarily complicated.
Yeah,
No.
Cumbersome.
Well, indeed. No, all you need to do is just at the beginning of the rising movement or some other predominant object you label accordingly as rising, as pain, and whatnot, and then take your time to observe the whole object without labeling any further. But do observe and know the different sensations or features that are coming up. Okay, then Mac.
Sir, I don't understand the word contemplation. You've spoken many times about the contemplation of this. Does that mean I sit down and think about it?
Oh.
That doesn't sound like it. I don't know what to do with it.
So it's good that you're asking this question. I'm glad. The term contemplation, the English term contemplation has in Pali, the equivalent in Pali is anupassana. And contemplation is a repeated observation of objects under a particular aspect. So, we could, for instance, undertake the contemplation of impermanence, anicca-nupassana. And then you see, and this happens quite naturally in the course of the meditation practice, then a meditator will see formations mostly under the aspect of, or under the aspect of impermanence. And as continuously changing, and so maybe arising, lasting, passing, coming and going, dissolving. And as you're supposing already, when we say contemplation, this definitely does not mean to think about it, about impermanence, but to just observe, to actually see impermanence as impermanence. Mac, there's a huge difference between thinking and gaining intuitive knowledge. Now, thinking comes out, or it has to do with the intellect, and whereas intuitive understanding or wisdom arises out of mindful observation or contemplation of what is, and this does not imply thinking. So, when observing a pain, then we're not thinking about this pain. Is this pain now permanent, or is it impermanent, or what is it doing? Or you start putting up putting together all sorts of theories about this pain. Contemplation is simply observing what is. And the Buddha distinguishes between three kinds of gaining or acquiring knowledge. The first one is known as Suttamaya Panya. Panya means wisdom, and Maya means based, and Sutta is hearing or learning. And so it's knowledge gained or based on hearing, literally hearing a lecture, hearing a discourse, or hearing other people disseminate some knowledge, and this includes even reading books. Then the next form of knowledge is known as Chintamaya Panya, wisdom based or arising out of thinking or analyzing. Now, much of our modern knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, comes under this Chintamaya Panya. Now, this has its place, and it's for comfort and understanding nature and so on. It's extremely valuable. However, both of them, the first one, namely knowledge based on hearing, and knowledge based on thinking or analyzing, with these two, you will not be able to gain a clear understanding and direct understanding of, for instance, anatta, the aspect of non-self, and nor of nibbana. You can read 1,000 books on nibbana and theses and whatnot, and still you won't understand what is meant by it. And you can think for 100 years about nibbana, and you will still not be able to access it. a true understanding of both aspects, namely anatta as well as nibbana, comes, and many other aspects of the Buddha's teachings, comes from what is known as bhavana maya panya. So wisdom or knowledge based on mental development. Bhavana means mental development. And what we're doing here, namely practicing Satipaṭṭhāna or Vipassana, is a form of developing the mind. So please throw the thinking overboard and indulge in or engage in a direct observation of what is happening. The thinking has its place in ordinary life. So we need to think in the field of education and at the workplace, at home, and so on and so forth. But in the context of Vipassana meditation, the thinking is more of a hindrance than of an advantage. Does this help?
Thank you.
Yes? And when you find yourself thinking, let's say maybe looking around and then thinking about some aspect of nature or this or that, then simply just to recognize this or be mindful of this and right away label this as thinking, or speculating, or having philosophical thoughts, and so on, and let go of those and go back to a direct observation of what is happening. Okay. Anything else? If not, maybe this much for tonight. And then tomorrow is Friday, so there won't be any interviews. Marcia you're not giving interviews, I'm not going to give interviews either. But there will be a Dhamma talk tomorrow night.